customary that I'm drinking a rum old fashioned, but it's 10 o'clock in the morning right now. So
I was going to say, this is coffee, but I can neither confirm nor deny if it might have Irish creamer in it.
So let me tell the story of how we got to this. Why we're in this conversation and why we're doing this special. Obviously, I'm not in the studio. This is Studio B. And we did an episode. Well, it was back in January, I think, right? Like that, January. And where we were with Tony and Delphina, and we were kind of having some fun with the federal budget. Well, it was during not this most recent, but the previous time that we were, dramatically trying to avoid a government shutdown, which, just for the record, I don't think is such a bad thing. Like if it shuts down and just stops doing things for a little while, maybe that's okay. But and so we were having some fun with that, and I said, the premise was, well, here's a way that you could cut a bunch of stuff out of the federal budget. Just take stuff that really probably ought to be done by the states anyway, and just chop it out of the budget, and presto, the budget's smaller. And so we targeted the big ticket items, not counting, military, Social Security, Medicare. We can argue about those too, but we know they're not going anywhere. So we just looked at all the other stuff. And one of the biggest items, it looked like, from the numbers that I found, which you pointed out may not be correct. There was this farm services spend from the federal budget, which we figured, okay, well, that's got to be these farm subsidies that we hear about. We don't really know how they work. And then we had this whole argument about whether farm subsidies, were necessary, and whether they ought to be done, by the national government or the states. Blah blah blah. Anyway, that was just one little segment from that show, and then you, being a farmer, left us a comment on YouTube that we never got to see because it got deleted, right? It was like
it disappeared. I was a little annoyed when I went back a day later. I wanted to see if there was a response, and where the heck is it?
It was gone. I know, because then you went to another one of our videos and you kind of chided us for not for deleting your comment and not responding, and we didn't. Trevor, in fact, I think one of the replies was actually Trevor, our producer, was having a conversation with you on YouTube, trying to figure out what was going on, and it turns out that I still don't know. I mean, did you say something like? I can't imagine everything that I've heard from you so far. I can't imagine that you said anything that was offensive in that YouTube.
It was pretty much what was in my email. I mean, it was long, but it was. Yeah. Well, we've had other people. We've had other people leave long comments, so I don't know. Anyway, that one was gone. So we connected on a different video in the comments, and then you sent an email that said, "Okay, I'm a fourth generation farmer, and I'm against subsidies altogether. And here's why. This is how they work." And anyway, that got us to this. So that's why we're having this. Yep. So you can enlighten us on this. Let's back up. So you grew up in a farming family, fourth generation in Nebraska, right? That's correct.
That's where you are. So what's that like? Because not too many of us. I know, I kind of threw that at you. Well, most of us, the funny thing is, if you're not a farmer, then you probably don't know people who are farmers most of the time, right? Like if I live in suburban Houston, I don't know people who are. I mean, I'm not counting like the new trendy homesteader people that pretend to be farming or ranching or whatever, but like real farmers.
Let me put it this way: the office politics are with your family.
Okay.
If you work in an office, you have office politics. I did, when I was in college, I did 2 years working as IT, which was an interesting little thing. When they took me around to introduce me, he says, "Yeah, here's our new student IT assistant, and he's an agronomy major." Like, that doesn't jive.
How did that was like the early days of IT, right? That was
the early days.
Yeah,
that was the days when you could just kind of grow into it. I was actually, my primary job was working on a VAX mainframe.
Oh yeah,
uploading stuff.
If you really want to date that. That thing was supposed to have been retired before I got there.
Yeah, it was old when you
it was like,
got to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was old and ancient. It had a gigabyte hard drive, or 5 1 gigabyte hard drives were the size of washing machines. It was cool.
Yeah,
but anyway.
Yeah, we could have a whole. I have a little experience in the early days in IT too. That would be fun as another conversation. But anyway, so besides that, farming.
Yeah.
So
farming. I mean, to put it in perspective, I'm living in the house my grandfather bought my aunt and uncle in the 50s. My older brother lives in the house my great-grandfather bought in 1934.
Wow.
So we've just kind of been here.
In
I have traveled a bit, but...
Yeah. And occasionally you sneak in a movie that you're not supposed to watch.
Occasionally. Well, that when I was in college. Yeah.
In your college, yeah. So, and I remember in the email you said, so the type of farming that you do is you described it as like the typical commodity type.
Commodity grains. Yeah.
Commodity grains, right. Yeah.
And that is where the subsidies go to. There really aren't subsidies for livestock production as much as some people would like to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're burning up all the livestock land, so we may not need to worry about that. Referring to the Texas Panhandle fire going on right now.
Oh.
Apparently that's it's burning up quite a bit of like a large percentage of cattle grazing land in Texas.
Yeah, that's tough. There's reasons I don't want to be in cattle, because you actually have to work if you have cattle.
Yeah, all year. Yeah,
all year.
Yeah, not just the beginning and the end,
breaks.
but yeah. It's a tough business. But it's okay because we're going to grow meat in labs now, and we're not going to have to worry about it. Okay, I want to show. So before we get into the subsidy thing, I want to pick up a little bit from where we left off. So we're going to do this fancy. I'm going to share something on the screen. Let's see. Let's see if I can make this work. Here we go. All right, this was from. Wait, no, that's not the right one. Where is it? This one. Oh, I broke it. I broke my. So while I'm fixing my, I mentioned I'm on a new setup today. While I'm fixing it,
you want me to talk about the history of farm subsidies a little bit?
Yeah, let's do that. Go in. So how did this farm subsidy business get going in the beginning?
Well, it was when was the AA in the 30s, and I had looked some of that stuff up. But the farm crisis of the 30s was. We were growing way too much food, and we had the economic downturn, so there wasn't money for anybody.
Yeah.
And grain was fundamentally worthless.
Yeah.
There was way too much of it. And so federal government stepped in, and it was initially a supply management system, which is, some people think that's what it still is.
Yeah. That's what we hear all the time. The thing that we always hear is you get paid to not produce stuff so that you can keep producing things. Like they don't want the supply capability to dry up, so they keep paying you even when we don't need it. Like that's what the layman's understanding of the farm subsidies is.
It has been at times. The farm subsidy program is now, well, it'd be almost 100 years old, 90 years old or so.
Yeah.
It has been almost everything at some point. But it gets replaced changed every 5 to 6 years. There's a new farm bill, and sometimes they don't tweak much, sometimes they tweak a lot. The supply management schemes ended with the 1996 farm bill.
Okay. So that's a pretty good run. That was a 60-year run of basically that purpose, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they tried a lot of different concepts. There was the ever normal granary. The idea was that when grain prices fell below a set price, then the government would buy it and stockpile it. And then if grain prices rose above that price or above another trigger price, then there would be a reserve to sell into the market. And that ended up with the whole mountains of commodities that you sometimes hear about.
Yeah.
Vast warehouses of rotting food, basically.
So all of this reflects. So whatever the objective is, it all reflects the never-ending desire of our federal government to try to like turn the dials on things, try to get things to go the way they want, right? And this is a prime example of that. It's central planning, right? So we're gonna get to the exciting conclusion of all this is that as a farmer, what you would really like them to do is stop helping, right? But
yes, very
just
much.
stop helping. But let's look now. Where I have everything operating again now. So let's look at what we were looking at the time. And in this last episode, we had here we go. We had this up on the screen. Everybody was looking at this, and the idea was, and this is the data that I got said there's 400 billion. What represents about a third of federal spending. 1.3 trillion dollars of federal spending, 400, 2/3 of it is military, Social Security, Medicare, et cetera. About a third of it is all this. And we had this, agriculture is a big chunk. And what I saw said $101 billion in farm services, which we understood to be probably the subsidy program. You just told me earlier today that's not correct. And you also shared with me the actual USDA budget, which neither one of us can really make any sense out of. But I did pull this one picture out with a little bit of the text that talks about mandatory and discretionary spending. And anyway, when you look at, and the farm services is in here in the mandatory spending, but none of these numbers add up to me. So how do you, how much are we really, what are we spending? What are we spending on this?
Your top chart just has food, nutrition, and farm services flipped around.
Oh, is that the problem?
Nutrition is 100. Yeah, that's the main thing.
Oh, how did that happen? I got to fire the guy who made this graph. So food and nutrition is $100 billion?
It's mostly food stamps, the SNAP program. That's
okay.
It's something like 70 billion. Well, it changes from year to year, but you got the SNAP program that's somewhere around 70 billion a year. You've got WIC, you've got the student lunch program, you've got programs that buy food for food banks.
Right.
So they don't stockpile it anymore, but they'll go out and buy food and donate it to food banks.
Yeah.
So when food is cheap, food banks have a lot of donations coming in from the USDA.
Got you.
But that is the biggest chunk of the farm program is actually food stamps.
This is food stamps from the USDA. Okay. So if the farm subsidies is something like $30 billion, it's not as dramatic as I was making it sound in the beginning, but at $30 billion is still a big chunk of money that we could, let's see, by somebody's math a couple of years ago, who was it that said that we could take $200 million and give everybody $1 million in the country? Remember what was that? That was something. It was some politician, right? Who said, maybe it was, it sounds like maybe AOC. Somebody who said, well, with the $200 million that we spent on this, we could give everybody in the country $1 million. $30 billion is still a good chunk of money. And, and that's what is going into this, this farm subsidies, right?
That's what funds the FSA, the RMA, and the NRCS.
Okay, so we're going to get into it.
And I don't know how much of that is administrative costs. That's what I'd really like to be able to figure it out from the farm budget, but I think at least half of that is actually administrative costs.
Gotcha.
Just the salaries of the employees and stuff.
Sure. Well, people are always the most expensive thing. All right, now you explained to me in an email how the subsidy program works, and this part I think is fascinating. But the first thing to point out
is, and you explained the two different. There's the direct payments and the insurance. But before we even get to that, there's this thing that blew me away, which is that the subsidies that you receive have nothing to do with what you produce. Not just the quantity that you produce, but not even what. Like it doesn't, like you could grow weed and it wouldn't matter so explain that. What's that all about?
Well, so the 1996 Farm Bill ended the supply management schemes.
Okay.
And it was an attempt to do what a lot of farmers wanted to do. It was actually an attempt to wean farmers off subsidies. It was an attempt to end, it was designed to end the whole program. So prior to that, there had been this concept called base acres, which was a rolling average of 5 to 10 years of what you had grown in the past. And it updated under the 85 Farm Bill. It just updated each year. It rolled in the last, the last one rolled off. The 1996 Farm Bill froze that and just said, okay, these are your base acres. We're going to end this. We're going to just pay you out a declining amount of money. We're going to start paying you maximum that we'd pay you under the program. Then for the next 10 years, we're going to pay you a little bit less each year.
Because we're weaning you off the program.
They were trying to wean off subsidies.
Okay.
And that lasted about 3 years, and then prices fell, and what needed to happen was happening. There was pain.
Yeah.
And the dead weight was getting weaned out, and then the dead weight squealed, and Congress started just passing all kinds of ad hoc disaster bills, and it was a disaster. But so these base acres, we still have these base acres that were still fixed from before 1996.
Yeah.
And there were opportunities. The 02 Farm Bill and the 08 updated them to some degree. But each field, each piece of ground has this history. It has a certain amount of acres and of a crop that you may or may not grow anymore.
Right.
It's what was grown back prior to 1996.
Yeah.
And it has a yield, and those yields have been updated a little bit, but they're still, they're really not related to today's yields.
All right, so let me hold you. So make sure we understand this. So in 1996, when they were supposed to be begin weaning you off the program, and I'm not good at math, but that feels like almost 30 years ago to me. It's a long weaning, right? So in 96, they said, well, we're not going to run this program anymore. So rather than all of the shit we got to do to figure out who's growing what, we're just going to freeze it and say, whatever you were growing in 96, that's what we're gonna use for the wean off period, right? And then, like you said, they come the early 2000s, prices are down, people start squealing, and the Congress comes back and they say, okay, we're gonna give you money again, but we're not gonna undo that thing that we did that was supposed to only be temporary. So now the temporary part is permanent, and everything else is hinging on that. But I want to don't lose your train of thought. But I want to go back to this thing that you said about what was happening. What needed to happen was happening, which is that there was pain. So explain that a little bit more. Why was that a good thing? I mean, I think I know the answer, but for those following along at home.
Because anytime you have the government supporting you, you're operating for the government.
Right.
You're doing things to maximize income or maximize your subsidy income. Well, especially back then when it was based on what you produced.
Right.
And so you had misinvestment, misallocation of resources, and it hurts when you have to reallocate.
So
it does. It's not fun.
So but the good pain, you mentioned, there was some like thinning out of I think what you were getting at is not everybody who was farming it, is necessarily doing great at it, right?
A lot of it is actually rents, which we can get into a little more as to how the subsidies impact you. But I'd looked it up. Something like 55 to 60% of the farmland in Nebraska and Iowa is not owned by the operator. It's owned by somebody else.
Okay.
Usually
China now,
little
probably.
old widow lady.
Yeah.
No, actually not. No.
Okay,
it's
good.
primarily widow ladies.
Yeah.
And so when you want to inflict pain on this system, you're actually going to inflict pain on widow ladies, and widow ladies scream loud. Just
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's not easy. This is not a
Right.
when you're stuck in a mess, you
They
can't get out
donate
easy.
to campaigns too a lot of times.
Yeah.
So all right.
But so you rent it, and farmers are going to bid as much for the land as they possibly can. You figure out how much income you're going to get.
Right.
You figure out what your expenses are, and basically whatever's left, you bid for rent on the land to get the land.
Because the land
if
is
you don't, someone else will.
Yeah, you mentioned this. So there's more farmers than land, right? Basically,
Yes.
There's more people that
Yes.
want to be farmers than land. This is another thing that's a misconception, because those of us who are not in the farming community are always under the impression, led to believe that that we need to make sure that we take care of farmers, because there aren't really that many of them. And if we lose them, then we're in trouble. And that's why, it's okay that these other like big players come in and buy up farmland. We're for some reason we're led to believe that like farmers are in short supply, but you're saying that's not the case. So
No. One of my neighbors, actually, who was about my age, he had health issues, but he passed away during harvest last year.
Oh.
It took all of, I think, 3 weeks for his ground to have new tenants on it, new farmers on it.
Wow. Okay. So there's plenty of farmers.
There's plenty of farmers.
Why?
I'm redundant. I could walk away and it wouldn't make a blip.
Yeah. So why do people want to farm? So, I mean, it's hard. Like Delphina was saying this when we were talking about that episode, because she did spend a little bit of time growing up on a farm. And she said, it's backbreaking, it's hard work, it's thankless, there's not that much money in it, right? So why do all these, and on top of that, you gotta basically like fight to try to get some land, trick some old lady out of renting it to somebody else instead of you. So why so many people want to do it so bad?
Be your own boss.
Yeah.
Don't have to report to somebody else. That's a lot of it.
Seems like there's easier ways to do that. Sounds really hard.
I mean, if you want to go do a lawn care business, the government isn't going to give you subsidized insurance and back you up your income.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So let's get it. All right. So let's get into that. So you were talking about so you were doing the history, and we were up to like the early 2000s, and now the government is back into spinning up these programs again, only with different objectives. Right.
Yeah, they're pumping money. Why is it happening? The question gets discussed now and then. Why does this continue? Is it just political inertia because we have the program and it gets funded? There's people. You ask 20 different people and you probably get 21 different answers.
Okay.
But part of the reason is. Part of the people that lobby for it, I suspect, is the bankers, because they are people that would be hurt. Farmers tend to borrow a fair bit of money, fair bit of capital.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have the government backing them, it's pretty likely they're going to pay it off. So you've got a population that borrows a lot of money, but it has a guarantee behind it.
Yeah.
If you're a banker, what's not to like about that?
Yeah. This is that's a chapter in Henry Hazlitt's book, Economics in One Lesson. He gets, and of course it was written years ago, but he gets into that whole dynamic of government, government backing things it basically makes people make more risky decisions because in terms of capital, because they don't have to worry about, and it has negative effects. All right. So,
but you were wanting to, let's see, you're talking about how the subsidies work today.
Yeah. So so how does it work today? There's two different programs, right?
So yeah, you've got the direct payments, and There's actually 2 different programs of that, and I'm not even going to really try to explain them both because I don't understand them. Farmers don't understand them.
So you just if a check comes in the mail, it comes in the mail, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. Is that kind of the okay?
That is exactly what it is.
Okay.
Except that when prices are down, you'll probably get a check, but your check for the field for one field is going to be different than the field across the road, even if they're growing the exact same crop. If they were growing something different
back in
prior to 1996.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I had typed this up actually back in 2018 when I had, well, this is probably in 2019, but the example is from 2018. I had taken the time to actually dig through how the check that came was derived. And
that had to be a good time. Because you just had nothing to do one day, and
actually it was discussions like this.
Yeah.
And someone was asking, and I wanted to figure out. I didn't necessarily know.
Yeah. Okay.
So this is a field that is about half corn and half soybeans. Is what it's been grown since. Probably since the early 2000s anyway.
Yeah.
It's typically half corn, half soybeans. But it has these base acres of, let's see, so what did I write down? It's got 65 base acres of corn, 45 acres of milo, and 40 acres of soybean base.
What is milo?
Grain sorghum.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. And so based on the prices that were paid to farmers in it would have been actually through 2017 through 2018.
Uh-huh.
There was a payment of 34 cents a bushel of corn and $1.16 per bushel of milo. But that was paid based on the yields that were grown, or the yields prior to 96. They were updated in 2002. So it's about half and half. So the 100 or 75 acres, it'd be 75 acres of corn and 75 acres of milo today.
Okay.
But the 65 acres of corn, based on an old yield, the yield that's about half what I actually get today, got 34 cents a bushel of price support. And the milo, 45 acres of milo, got $1.16 per bushel. Wow. Although that milo yield is low.
So
that milo yield is really low back then. And then it's reduced by 0.85 and 0.965 or 0.32, which are just more or less random numbers that are thrown out there.
It's perfect. There's
so
a lot
the
of
total,
random numbers.
I mean, just to put these numbers in perspective.
Yeah. So what does that mean?
For that field got a total of $4,820 in subsidies
for the year.
The gross on that field was about $100,000, and I had spent about $85,000 to produce it. So I've got a $15,000 margin, and the government threw in a check of just under $5,000.
So I was about to say that an extra $5,000 doesn't sound like much, but when you're talking about a $15,000 margin, that's significant. That's significant. Yeah. Yeah.
Now those are prices that are based back in 2018. There weren't subsidies in, or I didn't get the program I was in on my acres.
Yeah.
Did not pay out anything in 2021, 2022,
or
2023, and probably won't in 2024.
And you mentioned that before in the email that, so if I understand this just at the fundamental level, you got, based on what the field produced prior to 96, today we're going to look at prices, and then we're going to use some sort of magic calculation to figure out whether whether Paul ought to get some money on this field based on what you produced in 96 and today's prices. We're going to put that into our little magic calculator and, yeah, Paul gets an extra $4,800 this year. And now next year, it might be different. So the two parts of that equation, one part is whatever you were doing back in the 90s. The other part is whatever prices are today. So depending on whatever the prices are today, you may or may not get money, and you may or may get more or less money, but we can't replicate the calculation. We don't really know what it is.
Pretty much.
Okay, so my tax dollars at work. That's excellent. Now, but that part. Okay, so that part's not surprising. Anybody who's ever actually tried to figure out how their federal taxes work, you're right. Like it's not a shocker to hear that that's how the program works. I want to get to the point about why you think you'd like to not have it at all. And before we do that, there's this other thing about the insurance, right? This like subsidized. So explain that one really quickly.
Okay, so that is based on what I've been growing. It's based on on a rolling 10-year average. Okay. So what was planted and the yields averaged for the last 10 years on that field. And you can buy based on what you plant, what I've been planting this year. So it's been half corn, half beans. Mm-hmm. So you can buy 4 different levels, might be 5, but 4 different levels are the most common of insurance. You can buy a policy that will guarantee you a percentage of what your historical average was. So if your average over the last 10 years has been 200 bushels of corn that you've yielded per acre, you can buy a policy that will guarantee you 85% of that.
Okay.
So that'd be...
So like if green lasers come out of the sky and burn up your field, you still got 85%. Okay.
Yeah, they'll still pay 85%. And you can pick anywhere from 65, 70, 75, 80, 85.
So that sounds like that sounds like a fairly typical insurance policy, right? It's like the kind of thing that you get insurance for, right?
And the government pays roughly half of the premium.
That's the subsidy aspect of it.
That's the subsidized part of it. They simply pay, and it's the 85% level, they pay a smaller percentage. It's like they pay half at 85% and at 65%.
Oh, so it's like health insurance plans, basically. Yeah, depending on how.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. All right. So that's
how the insurance works. And then there are a number of add-on private products that aren't subsidized that will let you level up above that. I don't do any of that. I'm not familiar with it. I know it exists, but
at some point
that's the gist of how the insurance works. They're paying somewhere around 55% of the premium to buy a policy that will guarantee you a minimum yield.
So this is why banks don't mind providing capital to farmers, even if it looks risky, because the government's going to, if you got the insurance, the government's going to, it sounds like the direct payment thing isn't going to do a whole lot for you in that case, but the insurance is there. The
insurance is there. And that's what I think I put in the email, that most farmers would be happy to get rid of that direct payment because it isn't really connected to how you're doing now.
But it is kind of like a surprise Christmas gift every so often, right? I mean,
it is.
Get some money.
It is.
In the I mean, it pays for a vacation, maybe. Not that you ever get to take a vacation, but if it did, then.
Well, I don't have livestock, so I can take off.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. It's the livestock problem. Yeah. So, okay, so you got this insurance plan, and that gets us to, you had said, so basically your whole premise was, we'd like to see all this go away because it actually reduces farmer profits. And I had to read your explanation a couple times to understand it. And I was like, oh yeah, I get it. I get what's happening. And so let's get into it. Let's talk about that a little bit. What happens? Oh, and by the way, I have your photos that you sent me here. So at the point that they become relevant, let me know and we'll look at those photos.
Yeah.
Okay. So how does all this help that you're getting from the government actually cause you to make less money?
Because the biggest expense, the biggest single, but probably 30-40% of the expense is the land.
Sure.
The cost of acquiring land is your primary expense. And every farmer, when there's leasing land for which is competition, you bid as much for the land as you think you possibly can, because you can't farm without land. If you don't, you're not a farmer if you don't have some land to farm. And there are always guys that want to farm more. And there's always machinery companies willing to make bigger machinery so they can keep farming more. And it's just kind of a snowball, but it means that farmers are going to bid all of the expected profit into the cost of land. There isn't a lot of money in farming per se. It's all in land ownership, because all of the profit gets bid into land. And it doesn't matter how much profit there is.
Yeah.
You can bid any amount of profit into land.
All right, so let's understand that a little bit better. So when you're bidding the profit into the land, so somebody says, I've got some land here and I want $100 for it. And so people are, or they don't say, I don't know how that works, but anyway, people are bidding for this land. And so whenever you bid for something, you're trying to figure out how much can I afford to pay for this. And what you're saying is they calculate how much they can produce. They get an idea, this is how much I can produce. This is how much it's going to cost me. This is how much profit I'm going to make, but I'm going to take my expected profit and assume that I'm going to also use that to pay for the land.
Correct.
What do I use to buy groceries and stuff?
Well, you don't worry about that.
Okay. Because I have a farm, so I don't have to buy groceries. Okay.
Yeah,
so
you do. But, I mean, that's if land is offered on cash or on a rent auction, which a certain amount is, it gets bid to where every penny is there, because there's somebody is already farming some ground and they want to farm more.
Right.
And they're buying their groceries with what they have already.
Gotcha. Okay.
So they don't really care about making more money.
So why do you want to farm more ground that you're not going to make any money off of? It's like, I want to do more work for the same amount of profit.
Why do people go climb mountains?
Wow.
Why do people do any kind of adventure things?
Yeah.
You just want to do it. You're not making money off climbing Everest. I mean, the people in Nepal's making money off it, but
yeah. And the Undertaker, he makes a little money now and again.
Yeah. Unless they stay up there, but
then they become like
it's because there are more people wanting to farm than there's land.
So all right, so people are going, all right, I want more land, and I'm already making ends meet with what I got over here, and I just want this land, and I want to farm it, I want to own it, and so now we understand what you mean by bidding all the profit into the land. So then, so what? Why is that bad? What is that? What happens then?
Well, then most people aren't making any money. You can't. New farmers can't get into it unless you're already financially independent. You can't really get into farming. You can't acquire more land because there's no profit. You can't go out and borrow money to pay for land if you're not making any profit on the land. And you can't go rent ground. If you don't already have your base income, you can't go rent more ground that you aren't going to make any money off of.
Okay, right. So when people are bidding the profit into that, that's when you're talking about rents, really, right?
Rents, it's the price of farmland. When I started farming, 25 years ago,
Yeah.
land would bring, well, 2,200 an acre was a pretty healthy price for a piece of good ground here.
Right, right.
And your income was about, say, $300 or $400 an acre you can get off it. Now your income's more like $1,200 an acre you can get off it, your gross income.
Yeah.
And it's bringing 12 to 15,000 an acre.
Is the
So
price.
you're just talking a lot of money wrapped up in the land.
Got you.
So there is a lot of money. Delphine said there's no money in it, or you said there's not a lot of money. There is a lot of money. It's just in the land.
It's just in the land. Okay.
It's all locked up in the land.
So now you talked about this problem where, and this is the part that made sense to me from an economics point of view, is because, and the analogy that you used was, school subsidizing college tuition causes more college tuitions to become more expensive. So the fact that people are bidding all their profit into the land, that banks are loaning money very easily because of the insurance, it skews the risk profile on these investments. And so you seem to say that all that does in the end is drive up the price of the land, right? Just
correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Making it harder for people.
That's all you're doing with all the farm subsidies. You're just driving up the price of land, both the sale price and the price it takes to rent it.
And if the land is the single biggest expense, and it's also on the critical path to being able to farm, then okay. So this whole thing about profitability is reducing farmer profits. I mean, if you're taking the thing that's the single biggest expense, the biggest thing that impacts the bottom line from a cost standpoint, and you're continuing to make that more and more expensive, then like automatically I got to worry that profitability is going to be a problem, right? If I'm trying to build factory, or if I want to be in the manufacturing business, and we keep doing something that causes factories to become more expensive to build and to operate, then that's automatically it's going to have an impact on profitability. Mm-hmm. So, is my thinking straight on that?
Yeah, no, that's correct. And it really doesn't impact the price of the commodities that we sell, at least not since about 2006. In 2006, the prices, and previously, the prices were low enough that there were production subsidies. But we're talking almost 20 years ago now, 18 years ago.
Well, and commodity prices are usually dictated by the market more than anything else, right? The fact that it's not like the McDonald's thing is in the news right now, right? Because California raises minimum wage to $20, and everybody goes, well, now it's going to increase the cost of your Big Mac. Maybe McDonald's can increase the price. Maybe they can get away with it. Maybe they can't. But in commodities, like the price is whatever the market is saying, right? You don't, because it costs you more to produce corn, you don't get to charge more for corn.
No.
Yeah.
No. But on the other hand, the actual cost to produce it, aside from land, is
pretty small.
It's not that high.
So
the non-land. Well, the U.S. agriculture is mechanized. We're highly mechanized, and anytime you've got something,
so you don't have a big labor cost that you're dealing with, is what you're saying. Yeah.
No, you have machinery is your second biggest cost.
Yeah.
And new machinery is really easy to run if you can afford it.
Really? Okay.
It's not backbreaking. I kind of had to laugh at. I mean, you can have a couple $1 million wrapped up in not much of it, but
right.
It's pretty easy to run.
But it's not like Delphina was saying, this is backbreaking work. It was, and I don't know, she grew up on a farm. Delphina's about 150 years old, so she probably back then it was. I'd throw that in there in case she watches this. So, all right. So where are we at? So the government's giving all this money, and in the end, it's reducing farmer profitability.
It just increases land cost, increases the price of land. The one thing it does, and again, you can look at this as a philosophy discussion to some degree. A lot of local government units, like in Nebraska, the local school districts are almost completely funded by property tax, and the townships that maintain the rural roads, the rural fire departments, they're all paid funded by property tax. The higher the value, and in rural farming areas, by far the most value of property is the farmland. So you raise the price of the farmland, you raise the taxes that are collected on it, and it's kind of a way for the federal government to fund local government units without actually sending dollars to local government units, if that made any sense at all.
Oh, wait, no. So run it. Okay.
So the local government, the school districts, fire department.
Right.
I'm not sure about other states, but here they're primarily funded with property tax.
It's the same in Texas. Texas. Yeah.
And so the higher you increase the value of the property, the higher the property tax.
Okay, I got you. So Uncle Sam says, presto, your land is now worth 20% more, and the local government says, thank you, that'll be 20% more on your property tax. Well,
yes.
That's a beautiful system. That's great. What? So, all right. So, what about? I want to ask you about this, because, and I mentioned in Henry Hazlitt's book, and he used to talk about this a lot. He's an economist from the Swiss school, I believe. But one of the points that he made about farmers, I remember when I was, and I thought maybe you were kind of getting to this earlier, but he made this, drew this conclusion that said, when, and I might have said this on the previous episode, that by the government stepping in and making it, you said farmers require a lot of capital. So they can get the capital from banks, they can get the capital from the government. Now, based on how you've explained the way it works, I think this part isn't exactly right, but maybe the effect is still there. So banks are more inclined, they assess the risk profile differently than the government does with their money. And so the government is willing to give people money that haven't necessarily proven themselves to be good at the thing that they're giving the money to do. Whereas the banks want a little bit more certainty that you actually know that you're going to be good at this, that you're going to be able to you pay this loan back. The third possibility, which I think is what you've hit on, which is, or the banks may not worry so much if they know that, well, you're not a very good farmer, but the government's got you back with this insurance policy. So in either case, the effect is the same. And his whole point was that by taking out the smart analysis of the risk profile, like with any investment, you're now enabling people to do something. You got people who are good at it and you got people who aren't so good at it. But by providing capital to the people that aren't good at it, now, you're kind of weakening the whole thing. And you end up with, the whole farming industry as a whole now is less good at producing product, efficiently at a profit. Basically, it just weakens the whole thing. Yeah. Is that the? What do you think?
The direct payments probably don't do that.
They don't seem they're not enough
from production.
Yeah, and they're just not that much. It seems like they're not enough to really move the needle.
They're not really that much.
Yeah,
they're not nothing, but
but you can't just live on. You can't just like torch your field and live on the subsidy payment, right, from the direct payments.
No. not a chance.
Right.
No, that wouldn't cover the rent on it.
Right.
But because that 80,000 or 85,000, like a third of that would have been rent.
Yeah. Yeah.
But any that I spent to produce that crop. But anyway, in the main corn belt,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it actually matters because people are going to grow corn and soybeans there anyway,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what the market wants.
Right.
There's a little bit on the fringes where areas that maybe would be probably just as productive if they were in pasture, but you can grow corn because the insurance keeps you from going broke in a bad year. But it'd be, if you didn't have the insurance, you'd just leave it in grass and you'd graze cattle on there, because in a bad year, you just pull the cattle off and you don't have any money invested into it.
Yeah. So I'm not hearing that there's, it sounds like if you have a farmer who's producing corn on this piece of land, then you're kind of either you are producing corn there or you're not producing corn there. There's not really much in terms of this guy's really good at it, and so he can produce more efficiently for less cost versus this guy over here who's just kind of screwing around and doesn't know what he's doing.
In general, the guy that's screwing around doesn't know what he was doing is going to lose that ground. It's because his neighbor that can grow a better yield for the same cost or the same yield for lower cost is going to go to the landowner and say, I'll pay you an extra $50 an acre.
So the free market wins again. Once again, the free market.
Yes.
Yeah.
The free market doesn't need the government in there.
So it doesn't really, so it sounds like the government subsidies, the way they actually work, aren't enough to prop up somebody indefinitely who's no good at farming.
No.
Okay.
No, they just prop up the price of land.
The price of land. Interesting. Yeah. I wouldn't have guessed that. I want to ask you this other thing too. So we hear, those of us non-farmers, this other thing we hear about growing corn for ethanol is like very controversial, right? So, and I can't actually even remember like what the whole thing about, this is what it was, is that we got way too much farmland that's being converted to corn because there's so much money that in growing corn for ethanol, and it's throwing off the balance of kind of how we're using farmland in the country. Is that real?
Not really.
No.
There isn't much else you can do with that. With corn is an incredibly productive crop.
Right.
That's what people outside of farming don't necessarily realize. It gets a bad rap because there's so much of it. But as far as amount of grain produced or amount of product produced per inputs, corn is the most productive grain, bar none.
Yeah.
By far. So anything you're going to do with grain, any kind of grain, you've just got so much more of it with corn.
Yeah.
Than
so you're
than
already
else.
So if I'm a farmer, I'm already plenty incented to produce corn with or without that whole ethanol thing. I got lots of good reasons.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Now it is. There are no ethanol subsidies anymore. You're aware of that?
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Yeah.
The ethanol subsidies ended in 2014.
Oh, okay.
They were supposed to end in 2008, and then people squealed.
Yeah.
And they got them extended to 2014. So there haven't been ethanol subsidies for the last 10 years.
Well, it's good because ethanol sucks as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't.
The cattle feeders love it.
Yeah.
Cattle feeders love ethanol because the byproduct, what's left over after you've taken the starch out, is actually a really good component to blend into cattle feed.
Oh, really?
And there's one large feedlot near us that it's actually a distant relative that runs it. he said,
Nebraska, aren't you all distant relatives up there? I mean, nobody really doesn't. There's not a lot of people coming and going. I don't think.
There were about 8 different families.
Okay, all right, fair. That's fair.
He said ethanol was the best thing that happened to the cattle
you got
feedlot.
locked up there.
I can hear you.
Oh, there you. Okay, all right, you're back.
Okay. So he said ethanol was the best thing that happened to him because they could blend the ration to improve the animal health. And they had been using antibiotics, subtherapeutic antibiotics, prior to that. And he said once they managed to figure out how to use the ethanol byproduct, they quit them entirely. They didn't need them.
Okay, well, that's fair.
Livestock health was much better.
That's good.
You also had asked, let's see, should we cover your questions before we run out of time here?
I think I got everything.
You asked if we're paid not to produce anything.
Oh, yeah. There's that
and there is the Conservation Reserve Program. There's 25, somewhere around 25 million acres in that. Technically, it's supposed to be sensitive acres, environmentally sensitive acres, that the government rents for 10 to 15-year contracts at a time. And then those acres are supposed to be maintained in natural or native habitats or wildlife habitats.
Okay, so that's that's different.
Those are acres that are being paid not to produce. A lot of them are acres that should be in grass anyway, but if it wasn't for the CRP, they could be livestock grazing. Yeah. And we could be grazing livestock there, or the cattle there, instead of feeding them in feedlots.
Okay, but that's just about conservation. This whole thing about what I've always, in fact, I was just talking to somebody the other day, and they were like, oh, yeah, well, we pay farmers not to produce anything. There was this notion that, like, farmers on a broad scale are, during some years, the government pays you what you would have earned that year, presumably, or some magic calculation.
Yeah.
That they pay you that, but they say don't produce anything because they're trying to manipulate supply.
That all ended with the 96 Farm Bill.
Okay, so that has there were years like that prior to 96. Okay,
none of that has happened.
None of that has
since 96.
Interesting. Okay, so we're just debunking all the myths. Well, it's kind of like a myth. Like, it used to be that way, and it's not. But once people get something in their head, they just think that they just think that's how it works. What about Well, go ahead. What? Do you have something? No. Okay. What about these photos that you sent me? What do we?
Okay, yeah. Let's
let me get them.
Pull up to Wetland S. Is that, or we'll just pull them up. If you can.
I have them in the same sequence that you sent them to me.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I should. I didn't. Check the sequence when I sent
it. Okay. Let's see. So I have them all. They're all together though. So let's do this.
Okay. So as part of the Farm Bill, part of taking the farm subsidies,
I think that one.
Down,
this one right here?
Yeah, that one. That one.
Okay, this one.
Part of taking the subsidies, there's a lot of sticks, a lot of hoops you got to jump through.
Right.
And if I want to, that area in that picture is considered a wetland. Now, I don't know if that's what your viewers...
That's a wetland.
On both of your faithful... Yes.
Well, it looks a little muddy, So, down here in the Gulf Coast, this isn't what we would call a wetland. I'll say that.
No.
Yeah.
No. That is called a wetland here.
Okay.
Because if you get a big enough rain, water will stand there for up to a week.
Okay.
So you can scroll. Let's see, probably the top one. Where's that picture of water?
Okay,
that is that same area. The morning after we got 6 inches of rain, we got 6 inches of rain in one night. So there was water there.
So wetlands,
and it took most of a week. Let's see, that most of that water ran off that day.
Sure,
there would have been about 3 inches or so left 12 hours later.
Yeah. Do you stock that thing with any fish for those few days? Well, it's,
Okay, scroll down. The bottom one.
Yeah, here we go.
That is that same spot 20 days later.
Doesn't look too wet.
So it's gone.
Yeah.
All the water's gone.
And you're planting there.
But I'm planting there. 20 days later.
That's
but it is considered a wetland.
So what happened?
And if I want to be eligible for any kind of farm subsidies, I can plant it like that, but I can't move any dirt. I can't do anything to affect it.
Because you don't want to disrupt the delicate ecological things that are happening in
yes,
this area.
Exactly. Now, if we go to where that pit is, what I would like to do...
You can't make that up. Okay.
Is this. I don't know if that really zooms in. That's that's actually an irrigation reuse pit.
Okay.
But what I'd like to do is dig that on my own dime.
Yeah.
In that location.
Right.
It'd be a little bit of grassed waterway.
Right.
When we get a big 6-inch rain, it would hold some water. I'd make one a little bigger than that.
Yeah.
So we'd be talking 5-6 acre feet of water would stay there.
Right.
It would eventually percolate down into the aquifer. It would not contribute to flood waters on the rivers when there's a flood.
Right.
And to my way of thinking, it would be a benefit all the way around. But you have some bureaucrats in 1985. This pit was put in prior to 85.
Okay.
The Swamp Buster Act was amended. It was added to the Farm Bill as part of the 85.
Swamp Buster Act. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So somebody said no more digging pits to hold water.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And the presumed reasoning was, well,
because
if you had
it actually, the presumed reasoning was because we're draining all our wetlands.
Yeah. You could see
that does, if you're actually running the water downstream, then that contributes to flooding.
Yeah, if you have a real wetland, like a legitimate wetland, and now you're trying to dig some sort of a retention pond to like draw the water in so you can use the land for something else, that's a real concern. So the problem lies in the definition of what is a wetland, basically. Like that's somebody came up with a definition that said if it rains and there's a puddle for longer than
7 days,
then it's a wetland.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter like what animal life or plant life is present. It's just if the water sits there.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
If the water sits there for more than 7 days.
Wow. I mean, I have water in my backyard sometimes for more than 7 days because, I still haven't got that drainage figured out. But that's okay. So government logic strikes again, basically. Is what we have there.
So yeah, I would like to just, we're concerned about climate change. We're concerned about water supplies. To my way of thinking, digging a retention pit there would be in a small way. It'd contribute to reducing flood runoff.
Sure.
And it would be a little bit of aquifer recharge.
Yeah. But no good deed goes unpunished.
No digging because it's a wetland.
No digging. Now, do they send people around to? This is how my brain works. Yes. Do you get caught if you do that?
Yes.
Yeah. So now they can just do it with aerial photography and satellites and drones and things. Right?
Yeah.
They don't have to send somebody around.
No, but they do. They have a file. They have a file on that field that has a picture of that area.
Oh,
I'm not kidding you. They do.
And now we can use like some sort of AI thing to just automatically compare like all the current satellite imagery to the historical.
Yeah.
And
now they wouldn't have to send people.
They wouldn't have to send people.
10 years ago, you could dig the pit and it might be 3 or 4 years before
somebody found out. Right. Yeah.
But at which point they would then require you to pay back any farm program payments you'd received on any farm.
Oh yeah.
With interest.
Big risk.
And restore it to the original condition.
Okay, that's fair. See, because the next thing I was thinking about was, what about some sort of like camouflage netting that you stretch over the top of it? that doesn't.
Did you
show
look
up
at that
on
water picture? What kind of camouflage is going to hang up to that?
Yeah, it's gonna be a big one. All right, I have one more thing that I want to ask you, and then we could be done. And this is this. Some years ago there was, and this has nothing to do with government subsidies, but since you're a farmer and we're flushing out what's true and what's false, what about this whole thing? Remember the deal? What's the big company, Monsanto? And they were supposedly had this like these genetic markers in their seed, and if somebody's thing blew over onto your property and you like not even knowingly ended up had something growing from a seed from the other guy's farm, and that was Monsanto and yours isn't, then they come in and they like levy some sort of thing against you. They make you pay for all of it. Was that just like social media hype, or was that really going on?
Like all good legends,
right?
There is a tiny kernel of truth.
Right. Yeah.
And the kernel of truth that was based on was a guy in Canada who had a canola field. Canola is notorious for pollen movement.
Okay.
He realized there was some volunteer canola around the edge of his field that didn't die when he sprayed Roundup around the fence.
Oh shit!
And the only way that could be was if it had been drifted in, blown in off the road.
Right. And Monsanto had this Roundup resistance stuff that they'd done, right? Yeah.
Yes, and at the time, Monsanto was the only company with it. So he thought that'd be kind of fun to have that seed for himself. So he took his sprayer and went around the edge of the field and sprayed Roundup on his canola, which meant that all the non-Monsanto canola died.
Mm.
And so then he went around with the combine when it was ready and harvested that.
And harvested so he knew he had the pure stuff.
He knew he had, 95% or whatever.
Yeah.
He knew he had mostly Monsanto genetics. And then he planted that the next year. And he got in trouble over that.
Yeah. So
Monsanto took a very dim view of that.
Yeah, but
and the courts backed them up.
Yeah, because clearly, and by the way, I have become less and less. So as I've gotten older, I've become. It's kind of funny. Usually this goes the other way, but I'm less supportive of large corporations now than I used to be in my naive years, and so I don't have. So it wouldn't surprise me that some large corporation was doing something abusive. That wouldn't be a shocker. But in this case, clearly the guy was like he was working the angle. There's no, he was working. It wasn't like something that accidentally happened to him, right? Where it's like oh shit, this thing blew over on my property and it grew and I didn't know, and they came in and that was okay.
Yeah. He knew what he was doing. He played up the he played up the story. They're coming after big corporation coming after a poor little guy.
It's easy to do.
Yeah. And there's been a few other cases. There was a guy, I forget what state he was. He even had stuff on YouTube, but he had been given some soybean seed as just like a trial thing.
Yeah.
And he'd never signed a contract with Monsanto. But he thought, well, this I'll just plant this separate and I'll harvest it and keep that seed because I didn't sign a contract. Well, it would have been fine if he'd have grown it and harvested it and then sold, one and done.
Right. Use the sample for the sample. Right. Yeah.
But he saved the seed and regrew it. And he did it on ground he rented from his dad, and then his dad was sued, and then that really played nice in social media because they're going after this poor old farmer, poor retired farmer who didn't have anything to do with it.
Right.
Well, he didn't technically, but his kid knew what he was doing.
Yeah. Interesting.
So no, he hadn't signed a contract saying he wouldn't replant it, but it wasn't given to him as seed stock. It was given him to grow once and see what he
Yeah, there's such a thing as an implied contract in certain circumstances.
Yeah,
and
So there's a handful of other cases like that.
How do they find out though? Like, how do these guys get caught? Like the Monsanto inspectors come around and say something looks fishy.
They were selling.
Over here?
I think the soybean guy was selling the seed.
Oh, even better.
He was selling it to his neighbors.
Okay, it just gets better.